Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another week where we will be talking about the Philadelphia Flyers. My name is Brianna Beretta, and I'm joined with the Flyers insider for 97.3 ESPN, Kevin Durso. So there's been a lot happening this week. To start off, the Flyers are on a 3-game losing streak right now, coming off of a 5-game winning streak. So why don't we talk about the Avalanche game? That was who broke the streak for us and started our losing streak. Can't really be too mad. Nathan McKinnon had a 5-point game, but we were 0-2 in the first period on our power play. So what do you think really was what led to that loss for that game?
Not really having the type of talent that you can match that team. That's pretty much
Mhm.
what it is. It wasn't just McKinnon. Mikko Rantanen had a great game too. Eventually, Cale Makar got on the score sheet as well, not with a goal, but did have an assist later on. It's hard to tame those guys. And especially when you keep playing at the amount, the amount of games the Flyers have played, the lineups they've been going with. I kind of expressed that, and this kind of is a trending theme of the weekend, sort of, that they've gone with that 11-7 lineup a lot, and that can kind of drain your forwards after a while, and especially when you're chasing the game. I mean, they were down in that game before you knew it 2-0, and you're trying to come back from that. And it's an admirable effort by them to look at a 5-2 deficit going to the third period and find a way to cut that to 1 quickly and make it interesting and show that you're competitive. They looked like they were on the verge of tying the game. And then, as soon as, you brought up the power play and not scoring on your power plays, and Colorado gets one in the third period in a spot where you look like you're close to tying it, they score on it, and that's pretty much game over. So you have to take advantage of those opportunities. And because they're not a team right now with that take over the game level player, especially down the stretch in the third period, that's when Owen Tippett gets hurt. So now you don't have him available. So your 11 forward lineup becomes a 10 forward lineup. You basically you basically had to deal with what you had to deal with for the rest of that game. And that's hard. It's hard to complete a comeback when you're trying to do that. It's one thing to play a defensive style of hockey and play in control when you have the lead. It's another thing when you're trailing to have that kind of lineup and try to push as hard as you can for 20 minutes, maybe, to find a way to come back in a game. So it's just an element where you saw the talent level, and the disparity of it. And that's the thing in the process. You can't rush. Sure, the results have been great. Sure, they've been overachieving this season, and they're holding on to a playoff spot still, and that's all well and good, but they don't have that player yet.
Yeah.
And I said something about this later on in the course of the week about another team that they faced, and got a lot of responses of, well, they don't yet because of Matvei Mishkov. And that's true, but that's also not on the horizon anytime soon. That's not coming next season or anything like that. So for now, especially when you're as far ahead in the process as they look to be, nobody had them in a playoff spot at this stage of this season. As a result of that, there's kind of an element where you almost want to skip steps, or in your mind, you skip steps and you think, well, if they were, as a playoff team, if they had that level player, they might be able to win a game like that, as opposed to understanding the process and taking a step back and going, listen, this is all house money that they're playing with at this point, and they've got that player who's in the system eventually. It just is kind of one of those things where you look at those games in the here and now and how competitive they've been, and you go, if they had a player like that, maybe you counter what Colorado brings to the table.
They're in their rebuild years, they're saying, so it's their new era and everything. And you brought up how they've been doing the 11-7. So Owen Tippett gets hurt earlier this week, and they send Bobby Brink back down to the Phantoms. I feel like we just talked about this last week. We didn't think that was ever going to happen, but now here it is. And how do you think that is playing into this lineup and possibly this losing streak?
Well, it doesn't help because you could just go 12-6 and get things back to normal. And there's ways to do it. It's not easy. You're going to have to make a tough decision. And I understood the 11-7 lineup when you acquire Jamie Drysdale, when you don't really know who you want to take out for a game or two, and you kind of let that go. And then it worked itself out because Drysdale got sick and couldn't play either. So it worked itself out for a couple of games. Now you're getting stuck in this way of thinking right now, in the way of constructing the lineup, and it's going to have effects on your roster. I understand why they sent Brink down from a standpoint of, you don't want him to just come in, play fourth line minutes when he does play, and then come out of the lineup the next game. That doesn't make sense. But when they rolled this over after the Colorado game, They put Nick Delorier in, and he played on Sunday for 5 minutes and 12 seconds. You don't want a player in Bobby Brink's stage of his career to be playing like that. You don't want to see it. So don't bother having him up if that's the way it's going to be. If it's either in the lineup for 5 minutes or out of the lineup completely, send him down, get him minutes. It doesn't necessarily, we'll see how it translates to his development. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be immediate results. It doesn't mean that he's going to go down there, get his confidence back, get called up, and then all of a sudden he's a bona fide NHL player. It just doesn't work that way. So, for now, they could use a guy like that. They could have used a guy like that in the lineup against Colorado. They could have used a guy like that against Tampa Bay. They could have, he brings speed to the game. And it's one thing to have, 11 forwards, and one of them is Nick Delorier, who, yeah, sure, he's, the ability, he has the physicality, and he's the policeman, and that's all well and good. But you needed to counter those teams with speed, and you could have still put Delorier in your lineup, or anybody else for that matter, and rolled out six defensemen, brought in an extra forward, had a guy like Brink in that brings the speed game into play. Instead, you went with the 7 defensemen, which can also create confusion. I thought that the worst defenseman in the game against Colorado was Travis Sanheim, and it's not because he necessarily just played bad. I thought he was confused about which side of the ice to be on, because you've been taking him in and out of his rotation. For the whole season, he's played on the right side. Drysdale shows up. It's now you're going to go to the left side. But if they throw Cam York out there or Igor Zamula out there and they say, go ahead, Sanheim, take a shift here, now he's back on the right side potentially. That's just going to mess with a defenseman's head. It's going to get in the way of seeing real progress, and it's going to hurt the team more than it helps. So those are all things to consider. And I think right now they're trying to figure it out, and they've had to try to figure it out against teams that are really good and have a lot of skill and can beat you in that way. So that's another reason why it kind of doesn't play into your favor.
You were talking about how there's big players on these teams and how they're kind of like they're franchise players, and these players who come out and just have so much control of the ice. So Tampa Bay comes in. Kucherov had, again, an amazing game that night. And the Flyers just looked flat in a sense, I guess you could say. And again, there was no one really, I feel like, stepping up at that point. Urson didn't have a bad game, but what do you think, again, was the end-all be-all of why that turned out to be a loss?
Well, I don't think that, and I'm sure we're going to briefly touch on it, that the news from Tuesday afternoon helped in the room anyway, because it's still, regardless of what the context of the news is, it shakes up the room, and it's something that sits with players. This was 3 hours before the game that everybody was finding this out. So I thought at the beginning, maybe it looked like that had an impact, that they did come out a little bit flat, and they got, it wasn't that they had a bad first period or anything like that. It was just, right away, it was, you blinked and the puck was in the back of the net for Tampa, and it was their skill guys doing the job. And immediately you had to start chasing the game. This kind of goes back to in November, they had a bit of a losing streak and they kept giving up goals in the first 5 minutes of the first period. And then you're stuck. You're chasing from there. You're trying to you're trying to make the perfect play and you're trying to get back into it. And again, to their credit, they got it back to within a goal a couple of times. It just is one of those things where once you fall into the hole far enough, you can't make any mistakes from there. And they made too many. And especially when, there wasn't much to say about that game afterwards, because how'd you lose the game against Tampa Bay? Their power play is top ranked in the league, and your second ranked penalty kill was still no match for it, because their power play is that good. And when they take advantage of their power play opportunities, realistically, they finished the night with 2 power play goals. Realistically, it was close to 3, because one gets scored 2 seconds after a penalty expires. It was realistically 3. And yeah, you scored a power play goal yourself in this game, but that's not enough to match what Tampa did from that standpoint. So special teams was really your difference maker in that one.
So Urson had a press conference after that game, and he spoke in that press conference saying that he didn't think the team, is in a slump and everything, but he did say that he thinks they're taking too many penalty minutes. And this past month, Tyson Forster on his own has taken about 12 minutes in penalties. And overall, TK, I think, is leading with about 42 penalty minutes. Do you think that overall this could be something that's affecting the team, taking too much time and spending too much time in the box?
Against the teams they're playing, yes. This was like I said, with Tampa's power play, Colorado's is the same. You can't take penalties. And what I think stood out from Tuesday in particular against Tampa was John Tortorella was quick to point out that 2 of them were stupid penalties, that ones that you can't take. And the two players that you bring up, Konechny just plays that way, and Tortorella's kind of said you got to live with that because that's
Mhm.
how he plays is most effective. Forster, on the other hand, that's going to get old really quick for a young
Mhm.
player. That if you are trying to make an impression and you're trying to develop your game, well, you're not going to do it by taking penalties and sitting in the penalty box. And that's a concern because he's definitely been at the center of a lot of the penalty calls lately. And that's just something that's part of the teaching and development of the player is you have to try to figure out ways to be more effective. He's been really good on the forecheck and he's been really aggressive in that area, but
Mhm.
that can also get you into trouble. And I'm not saying that's where all of his penalties are being taken, but he kind of plays with that style where he wants to be aggressive and wants to take chances. And that can help create turnovers, can help you get possession back, and can do a lot of great things, but it can also lead to penalties. And that can be a detriment to your team, especially when you're playing high powered offenses and teams with good power plays. That's how a game can change really quickly. And I think you saw that in two of these games in particular. And that's an area that needs to be corrected. And it's you're going to have to do it on the fly because
Mhm.
they're playing two teams that will hurt you on power play and before the All-Star break. So that's something to consider.
So we can touch on the news. Carter Hart takes his leave of absence from the team indefinitely. So this moves Urson up to basically starting goalie, and it brings Peterson back up to the backup goalie. How do you think not only just switching from starting goalies and bringing up that backup goalie, but how this transition at this point in the season is going to affect this team in the upcoming season?
Well, for now, it won't have a huge impact because I would assume Sam Harrison's just going to get the final two games before the All-Star break, and that's that.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a lot to figure out once they come back. And, I guess to just touch on the timeline that we know of everything and how that news is impactful with Carter Hart, because, all I can do with that is speak in facts. I'm not going to recklessly speculate anything, but when you start to list the facts we know, you can, connect the dots for yourself. If you're out there listening, you can connect the dots for yourself on this. That Wednesday morning, there's a report out about 5 members of the 2018 Canadian World Junior team being told to surrender to London, Ontario police facing charges of sexual assault. Hart was on that team. Hart took a leave of absence within 24 hours of that report coming out. One of his other teammates from that junior team, Dylan Dubé, took a leave of absence on Sunday. 3 more followed on Wednesday morning. And by Wednesday afternoon, there was a release from the London Police Department about how they anticipate having a press conference on February 5th.
Mm-hmm.
That's all fact. That's all out there. That's all we can really say about it. But where I'm kind of going with the connection between the current goaltending situation and that is there may be more answers to that situation when that press conference happens on February 5th. The Flyers happen to not play their next game after Saturday until February 6th. So maybe there's a little bit more context to this going forward. We'll see. It would be reckless to speculate anything further than that, but for now, it's Sam Harrison's net. And I kind of alluded to on game night with Josh earlier this week, for all the people who didn't like the goals that Carter Hart was giving up, that thought Harrison should get more of the playing time, you're going to get your wish because he's the number one now. And they'll use Cal Peterson as needed for right now. I don't see any reason why they would put him in goal anytime this week. More, you're going to possibly see him as you start to face things like back-to-backs in February. There's not many of them, especially on the forefront. They're going to come back. They're going to have gaps in between. There's a nice pause in the middle of the month that kind of surrounds the Stadium Series that will
Mm-hmm.
allow Harrison to get some natural time off and be fresh and ready to go. But if you want to see how Sam Harrison handles number 1 minutes, you're going to see it because there's a good chance that they start him pretty much almost every game from here on out for a while until you see that maybe that next back-to-back or something like that. So, while all of this is up in the air and while we only know what we know on Carter Hart's side of things with the leave of absence, we can certainly say that Sam Harrison's going to get an extended look here.
Mm-hmm.
And they already took a chance on Harrison a little bit because they signed him in the offseason when they didn't have to. His contract still had 1 more year left on it, and they got ahead of it with a 2-year extension.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obvious they have trust in him. It's obvious that they believe in his abilities. And now we see if he can actually be a number 1.
Danny Briere said in the press conference that they held on Wednesday morning that he was super excited for his future and that he's really working for this and that this is something that they're really excited for the future. We've talked a lot about how the goalies have been so important to this team and so important to how this team has been winning and keeping their standings. Do you think that Cal Peterson is going to be somebody who's going to step up into that position and help them keep that goalie energy and that standing in them?
Well, he's going to have to if they want to maintain what they've started. That's just the way it's going to go. And it could happen in a multitude of scenarios. I mean, obviously this one's got a lot surrounding it that's unknown at the moment. It's a leave of absence. It's not the same thing as an injury. But
Mm-hmm.
Peterson was up earlier in the year due to that. He was up because of an injury earlier in the year and got one start where he didn't look so good and then got another and got a win out of it and looked good. So anything's possible with that, I guess. It's not like you're bringing in a guy who's a complete rookie. He's got experience, so it's not like you're just throwing a guy in cold at the NHL level and saying, figure it out and keep this thing going. But it's going to be a bit of an adventure. He wasn't having the best year in the American Hockey League. He was, kind of middle of the pack there. And that's concerning because now you're bringing him up to face much more legitimate talent, obviously. But I think the goal here is also that you don't need to use him as much as you hope that you do, kind of like your goal is Sam Harrison's the number one. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of a for better or worse kind of thing because, on one hand, Harrison may run with the opportunity, much like he did when he got some regular starts last season. And which is what opened the Flyers' eyes to him in the first place. Certainly Danny Briere's got a lot to do with this in terms of Briere was the one who was by that point in GM chair to sign the extension. That happened after Briere took over. So that shows you that the current regime has a lot of faith in him
Mm-hmm.
and it really falls on him. Peterson's when called upon, it's, next man up mentality. Be ready, and be ready for your opportunity when it comes and obviously work a lot in practice because you never know when that's going to be. And very much like in the beginning of the year when it was Carter Hart getting a lot of the starts and Sam Harrison was kind of having to sit around for a while and he would get a start when they could find a way to kind of get him in there. John Tortorella had said he's got to be ready for that opportunity whenever the time comes. And then as they found more of a rotation, now he got regular starts. I think it's going to be the same thing with Peterson, that you're just going to have to be ready. And it may be few and far between that you get a look, but when that time comes, be ready to go and be ready to try to keep your team in a game because right now, every single one of these games for where they are is going to matter. And that's substantial, but you need to be prepared, especially if you're not in the regular rotation at this point and getting very sporadic starts. So that's kind of where Peterson's mindset needs to be.
Coming off this crazy week and a bit of a turn for them off the 5-game win streak to a 3-game lose streak, how do you envision their matchup tonight with the Red Wings?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because the Red Wings have been on a bit of a roll lately themselves. They just lost to Dallas earlier this week, but they've had a strong run of success. And, again, I compare it to the Tampa game a little bit where Tampa is one of the teams holding a wild card spot. Detroit's the other. And that's substantial at this time of year now. It's maybe it didn't seem like it was going to be, and we didn't know exactly how the standings would play out with who's in, who's out kind of material, but they're both, Tampa was in and got a key win against the Flyers because they needed it to stay where they are in the standings. And Detroit's going to feel the same way. And, I don't know what to completely expect with this game because we've seen two totally different games that these two teams have played against each other so far. One was a 1-0 shutout and the other one was a 7-6 shootout game that was absolutely wild and featured a lot of scoring. So we'll see what kind of game we get in this one. And, again, kind of trying to figure out what the lineup's going to look like. Again, Harrison's probably in goal, and Harrison is the one who had the shutout in the 1-0 game in Philadelphia, which maybe is substantial in its own right. But nonetheless, you're going to have to deal with the fact that this is a team that is trying to, is definitely trying to make the playoffs. They've been on the cusp of it for a while, and they've got the young talent, they've got the veterans to make it happen. And they've been kind of an upstart team in their own right, because I don't know that people had them very high at the top of the standings. For a while, they were probably overachieving too, because they were near the top of the Atlantic Division, right up there with Boston at the start of the year. They've kind of fallen back to earth a little bit themselves. So, and especially if you're the Flyers, and I'm not trying to look ahead from the Flyer standpoint, but you know who's coming on Saturday, and you know what kind of team you're going to face, just like you were with Colorado, just like you were with when Dallas came in, that these are teams that sit very close to the top of the standings. You might want to put your best foot forward in the game against Detroit, against a team that's much more mid-pack, before you get one of the best in the league, because I think the last thing you want to do is go from a 5-game winning streak to entering the All-Star break on what could potentially be a 5-game losing streak if you don't turn things around against the Detroit Red Wings tonight. So that's all things to consider. At the very least, they need to try to find a way to get some points, because they haven't in a little while. It started to finally have the effect that I kind of have warned about for a while. They were losing those games over the weekend, and everybody else in the division kept losing too. So it didn't really impact them. Carolina got a win against Boston last night and was therefore able to jump back into second place. So the Flyers fall to third. And while there certainly is still a gap between third and fourth in the Metropolitan Division that won't change between now and the All-Star break, you don't want to sit with the same number of points that you have. You really would like to get points to keep moving that thing forward, so that when you come back from the All-Star break refreshed, you're ready to kind of take on that unofficial second half of the season and really finish what you started in terms of making that playoff push. They've got 2 more games, gets them to a nice round number of 50 games played this season. And once that happens, you know what to expect once you come back in February. 32 games to go. That's the stretch run, and see where this thing goes at down the stretch to the finish line. But before you get there, I think getting some points would certainly help in that cause.
So we'll have updates on all of these games on the Instagram for 97.3 ESPN and on 97.3ESPN.com. And we'll be back next week to talk about the Flyers, and we can talk about Travis Konechny in his All-Star game.